Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Stitching Tales, a podcast about both sewing and running your own sewing business. I am Johanna Lundström, the author of several sewing books, and I also have a YouTube channel. I create sewing patterns and lots of other content under my name, The Last Stitch.
And my name is Malena Hjerpe, and I am a freelance patternmaker. And I also create PDF pattern under the name Hazelhen Patterns.
And in today's episode, we asked for questions from you listeners. So we have a few questions now, right, Malena, that we would love to answer. And also, if you have any more questions, please keep them coming. You have several ways of leaving them. You can just drop a comment on any of our Instagram posts over at stitchingtalespod. You can also email us at stitchingtalespod with 1D at gmail.com, and also you can of course also leave comments on our YouTube channel, Stitching Tales Pod, as well, because we love getting questions. We like to get more questions. We have lots of things to say about sewing, so don't be shy. Bring on the questions, because we want to have even more questions, because we love doing these Q&A episodes. So right, Malena?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, here you have the chance to ask your questions, what you have been thinking about or what you're wondering. Or, I mean, it can be sewing related, pattern related, or if you're curious about what it's like to work as a small business. So just any questions are welcome.
Yeah, I think we're pretty qualified to answer them. And if we aren't, we will definitely do a good guesswork, a qualified guesswork.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Malena, should we start with one of the questions that you have gotten there? What's your first question?
Yes, let's see here. Do you always sew from scratch, or do you have a favorite upcycle memory to share? What do you do, Johanna? Have you any upcycle?
Yeah, I sometimes do upcycle stuff, but I have to say more and more rarely. I think, let me see here, one of my favorite upcycle projects. What I love to do, which is actually related to my one of my sewing patterns, or several sewing patterns, is that I have a couple of patterns for one for mittens and for a beanie, and I don't like to knit, to be honest. It takes too long and it's too difficult. But you can actually use one of my patterns, and we're definitely going to drop some photos here over Stitching Tales Pod Instagram account, is by using my sewing pattern both for the mittens and the beanie. You can act on, and you use an old sweater with the ribbing. I mean, an old knitted sweater you can get in any type of second-hand shop, or maybe you have an old sweater with a stain that you can't get rid of, and then you can just place the pattern on there and use the waistband ribbing, and maybe you have some nice cable knit on the sweater, and what you can just sew that together, and the sewing steps takes like 20 minutes tops. And when you put it on, it actually looks exactly like a knitted sweater, a knitted beanie. Or you can also use my mitten pattern for doing the same thing. I also have a video tutorial for that, where you just do the same thing. You use the ribbing or the cuffs for the cuff, and then you use like the actual garment knitted pieces for building the mittens piece. I mean, it sounds a little bit abstract again, explaining here. And also you can use felted wool if you have any like things that shrank in the washer or dryer because you use too much heat. So that's a tip that I highly recommend and that I do frequently. And I also am very happy to say that I have my studio here is in the same building as a couple of secondhand shops, and I also have two like a stone throw literally from my studio. So I do this a lot, and so that's probably my favorite like reoccurring upcycling project, is to reuse old sweaters, especially get nice quality. I mean, wool or cotton, it's going to look even better, but you can of course go for acrylic as well. I think that's one of my, like, the first comes to mind. Do you have any upcycling projects that comes to mind?
Not any particular, I have to say. I had, when the kids were younger, I did quite a lot of upcycling, like reusing fabric from old garments and sewed kids' clothes with them, because it's just, I mean, as you said, if a garment has a stain or a tear or a hole, something, it's such a waste to just throw away that whole garment. But then, I mean, kids' clothes, it's just perfect when it has so small pieces. So then I did use like elements of the old garment, and maybe the ribs are from new fabric, so it's not like 100% upcycling, but it's a mix of both new and old fabrics. So quite a lot of those I did when the kids are younger. But otherwise, no, I don't do so much upcycling, to be honest. I mend, try to fix, I mean, not often, but as often as I possibly can. Like, you know, when, especially with the kids' clothes, I mean, they tear so easily, and, you know, holes on the knees and stuff like that. So I actually try to fix those whenever I have the chance. I mean, just not any fancy mending or anything. It's just, you know, yeah, sewing up the holes so it doesn't look that bad. So that I do, but I always feel like, you know, like a really like, okay, a star in the book, I mended some clothes. You know?
Yeah, gold star for you, right? Yeah,
exactly.
I agree. Yeah, I think
so I don't. It's not so often. I have a pile of things that I want to fix, but usually, sometimes it might actually be that the kids have outgrown the garments before I actually take the time to fix them. So that's a little bit sad. But yeah, no, I don't do so much upcycling in that sense. I'm really inspired by people who does it on Instagram especially, and show like before and after pictures. That's really, I think it's such a creative and a good way of using old garments.
Yeah, it's definitely, I find it interesting too, and I've seen actually a debate which would be interesting to hear your thoughts about, as you listeners as well. I think I recall regarding that there was some criticism. Obviously, if you want to do, maybe you have a dress that is several sizes too big, and you get it in a second-hand shop, and then you alter it maybe to a smaller size and create a dress. Because obviously, if you want to do a lot of upcycling projects from already garments, you definitely need more fabric in general than just to give you all the extra fabric, right? So I saw some criticism about that. I honestly don't really know what I think about it, but I think it's always interesting to know, like, throw in a couple of different perspectives on this particular topic. That I saw some some opinions online whether that would reduce the amount of accessible garments for people who needs larger sizes, or plus in the higher size range, because it traditionally in secondhand shops, especially older garments, are usually there is a shortage of the higher end of the sizes, and probably it's much easier to find clothes that are too small in secondhand shops, to be honest, especially if they're older, due to different body types and development of styles and everything like that. So I just thought that was an interesting perspective, and again shows how complex things are. And I'm not sure if that really is like a proper issue or just a food for thought, but I thought it was an interesting way of seeing it as well. And sometimes I feel a little bit bad about buying those sweaters, on secondhand sweaters, because I honestly feel sometimes a little bit guilty. Maybe some person would like to have that, and then I turned it into a couple of beanies and a mitten as well. So yeah, so it's tricky. What's your spontaneous thoughts about that, Malena?
Yeah, no, I've heard and thought a lot about this as well, and as you say, it is tricky. Like, it's not black and white. It's like not right or wrong. Like, it really depends, I think. For example, if that garment in a second-hand shop would have been bought anyway and would have been worn and loved, well, yeah, then that's might be actually better that it's worn as it is because there's a purpose for that garment then. But if it's something that is just like, but this is not never gonna be worn, or like it has been there forever, nobody is buying it, yeah, then it's perfect that somebody buys and use it as a upcycled garment. So yeah, it really like I think depends. If it would have been worn as it is, yeah, then maybe not. It's not a good idea to do some upcycling project where you cut it apart and throw away half of it. Like that's a little bit wasteful in that case then. So yeah, it really depends. But I always think it's a little bit funny, you know, in those project runway types of shows or something like that, when they have like these upcycling projects or challenges, and it's like, oh, but it's a environmental friendly challenge, like it's so great. And it's like, yeah, I don't know, you just cut apart 10 perfectly fine pair of jeans to make one garment. Like, is that really green fashion? I think that's debatable. I mean, if those 10 pairs were, you know, you were able to wear them anyways, maybe then that's not so sustainable to cut them apart and use just use the waistband and make a new one dress out of them.
Yeah.
It's quite wasteful, to be honest. But again, it really depends. If those jeans would never have been worn again and they were going to, I mean, be thrown away, then sure. It's great that they are used again. So, yeah, it really, I think it's, the important thing is like big picture look at the end goal. Is it sustainable or not? Like, is this gonna be reducing the amount of new garments produced? Yes, then it's great. If it's not, then maybe not. Yeah. So it's a tough. I mean, it's so many aspects to consider when you talk about sustainable sewing.
Yeah, it definitely is. And also, I mean, sometimes I think, at least on YouTube, there's also like, just like with Project Runway, it's upcycling for entertainment value, so to speak. That, I mean, to be honest, some upcycling projects are incredibly creative, but maybe not something that you will actually wear. But it's just a visually appealing outfit or an amazing transformation, which can be deeply inspiring. But I've seen a lot of upcycling projects that, to be fair, I do not think that they will be actually worn to a certain extent. So to bring your point back to the denim thing, there is that that's my kind of fear. You know what I mean? It's like it's more of a creative expression perhaps than creating a wardrobe staple in some ways. And then maybe as again, it's not black and white, but food for thought, definitely. It's a good thing to discuss. I mean, when we say this, we don't, upcycling, as you say, it's the best thing ever for the environment. Like, nah.
Yeah, it really depends on the circumstances. Yeah. But the general idea that things should not be thrown away, they should be reused or repurposed or upcycled. Yes, I mean, obviously that is great. But I mean, it needs to be done in a sustainable way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And also another thing that I do, as I said, because I have so much access to secondhand shop, is that I when I use for example the Vida pants, my latest sewing pattern, I use one of the layers of the pocket lining is done with like cotton jersey, so the same there. Because I wanted to get some nice matching colors, I went to the secondhand shop and bought some really washed oversized men's t-shirts, and I don't think there was a queue for those particular t-shirts. Usually also has some, not maybe the most high-end fashion print on the or text. So again, maybe as you said, I removed the original garment purpose, obviously, because I used the fabric, cutting around the print and everything like that. But then again, I know that in a lot of secondhand shops, they don't sell everything. It's far from, because there is, and then you have the landfill problem again. And from my perspective, I think that it's better if I don't have fabric scraps in that particular what I needed. Then for me, it makes sense to use an old washed out t-shirt that is already produced, because the likelihood of that ending up at a landfill is unfortunately quite high, because it doesn't have hanger appeal. Because it's a second-hand shop, but still it has to be an appealing garment for the customer. So a lot of the stuff will, eventually be thrown away anyways.
Yeah, no, there I think it's a pretty clear what was the right thing to do or not. I'm a little bit sad because here where I live, we don't have that many great second-hand shops. I mean, we definitely have a few, but not. Yeah, it's. I kind of miss. I miss them. Whenever I go home to visit my family in Finland, in Vasa, there are so many great second-hand shops there, and they actually have like a different type of second-hand shop. Like you rent a small table, you put all your clothes there, and then the store is taking care of, payments and everything, so you don't need to be there or anything. You just need to leave your clothes, set them up nicely, and obviously add price tags, and then they take care of everything else. And they have a lot of those kind of shops back home in Finland. And there you can, sometimes when you like find those tables when it's like, okay, this person have kind of the same aesthetic as me, they have the same size as me, it's just like jackpot.
Yeah.
Then you buy half of everything, like what's on the table, and it's really. Yeah, I really like those kinds of second-hand shops. I've seen one or two of those types here in Sweden, but it's not like in Umeå where I live, but not that often. It's a little bit unfortunate.
I agree. It's the same here, because I live in the second largest city in Sweden, Gothenburg. And if any listeners here are from Sweden or visiting Sweden, I should recommend. In Malmö, in the south of Sweden, has a place called Loppis Lounge, and Loppis is the Swedish word for second-hand shop, and they have just that. And when you get there, there's really nice stuff, because it's basically almost like a Facebook marketplace, but it's people that either sell clothes or like interior stuff and kitchen utensils and everything. But as you say, it's very so you can find a whole rack of clothes from nice brands and everything, and a really nice price as well. So I think, as you say, I would love to see more. And of course now anyone listening living in Gothenburg is going to say, yeah, but we have this and this place, but it's not that prevalent, as you say, Malena, here in Sweden, unfortunately. But hopefully more places to come. And I would say also, as a side note, that I try to buy, because I'm so lucky, unless I sew myself, I shop a lot secondhand. Pretty much everything in my kitchen is secondhand, for instance, and most of my furniture as well, because I have this nice access to it. But if you don't have the same access, it's more difficult to get good stuff. But I guess online now, with all these type of online vendors, that's probably Facebook Marketplace, and I guess every country has their own. We have Blocket and Tradera and other similar online shops that you can get stuff as well. So I try to do that as well.
I love that it's like more normalized nowadays that to shop secondhand first. My kids' wardrobes, that is like, I would say 90% secondhand stuff, either bought or they have 6 older cousins, so we get a lot of clothes from them as well. So the clothes that are actually new is like birthday gifts, Christmas gifts, and so on. It's we really don't. We're fortunate in that sense that we don't have to shop so much new clothes. So I love the whole thing that it's like, it's completely normal to have secondhand. And actually, for my younger son, on his latest birthday, I saw some of his friends have done it, so it's like, okay, we're gonna do the same thing. They put a note on the invitations card to his birthday party that it's okay we like secondhand, so it's okay to give us thrifted or secondhand present as well, which I think is great, because then it's like let's normalize that. It is not a bad thing that it has been loved by somebody else before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the more we do that, that's probably a bigger thing to do for the environment. And perhaps upcycling is more, I think when we come to it, it's more a creative expression perhaps than, doing a big thing for the environment, I think. So yeah, that was we were able to we got a lot of like sidetracks, but this is such a fascinating topic, and again it shows how complex everything is. And it's same with sewing. You can't say, oh, I am more kind to the environment because I sew my own garments. I don't think that holds up, unfortunately, quite well. I mean, it's more perhaps a creativity exploration rather than, because there are lots of different aspects that goes into home sewing as well, that it's definitely not, sustainable in there's a lot of waste and everything like that as well. It's a complex
topic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have the next question?
Yes, I have another question, a totally different question, but one of my personal favorite, very nerdy topics is that I got the question on how to use interfacing on knit garments. I mean, stretch interfacing. And if you're not familiar with interfacing, it's basically what you use inside the garment to give it to stabilize it. I mean, you use it, for instance, on a collar, on a shirt. You use it on cuffs. You use it in the waistband. All areas where you need to stabilize some part of the garment. And we do it as home sewers, and we do it in the garment industry. It's crucial for good result. But on woven, it's pretty straightforward. But on knit fabrics, it's a little bit more tricky. And my general rule of thumb is that you shouldn't go overboard with using fusible interfacing on knit garments. But if you're doing more constructed garments, so if you're watching the video version now, I'm going to hold up. I'm wearing my own AV cardigan here, and it's a more of a dressier garment, so to speak. And I'm going to just so you can see a little bit better here. So it has a collar, it has placket, and it has pockets opening, and those are definitely areas that will benefit of being stabilized, because you don't want your knit fabric to stretch out, because that kind of removes the look of it a little bit. So for instance here, I'm going to hold up, so I'm holding now up for you who are not watching the video version, but we're going to post some picture over at stitchingtalespod as well. On the inside of the placket there's a white fusible interfacing here, and that's what I do when I do a placket on knit garments. So, and the tricky part here is, of course, that you want to keep some stretch, especially crosswise, because most knit fabrics are stretchy crosswise. Then you don't want to get your for instance, if you fuse pockets, for instance, pocket opening that is horizontal, you definitely want to have a little bit of a stretch. So that's a thing. And the good news is that there's a lot of stretch fusibles to choose from. Not always easy to find, but for instance, if you're here in Europe, the Flisseline Freudenberg brand, they have stretch fusibles, and you just do the same as you would do on a regular woven fabric. You fuse it by using low heat and press. So I'm holding up here. There are basically two versions that are quite common, and one has no lengthwise stretch, or pretty much no lengthwise stretch, but it has some crosswise stretch. So that's what I use mostly. For instance, when I'm fusing plackets or pocket opening, I just I don't need to have lengthwise stretch. But in some instances, you want some lengthwise stretch as well. And the good thing, there is actually a fusible that has a four-way stretch as well. So I'm holding up that now, and as you can see, it has a lot of stretch. So this should be used in very particular areas. I honestly, I guess in a collar, for instance, you can use both, for instance, but then again, maybe you want it to be quite stable. I try to think, I use it regularly, but now it kind of escapes me when it's best to use the four-way cross stitch, but not that often. But it's just if you have an area that you need to stretch in both directions.
I think maybe it affects the drape a little bit. If it's four-way stretch, maybe it drapes a little bit better.
Yeah, and it's softer. It's definitely much softer. So I'm holding it up now. You can see it has very soft hand. So, and it's really good quality. So I highly recommend you that you get it and try it and see what you think. And also, for instance, when you're fusing a collar knit, I definitely recommend also that you use the Fusible on both the upper and the under collar, because if you don't, you will get so much shifting of the layer that isn't interfaced. So you definitely need to be mindful about that as well. And I've also done both a blog post and a YouTube video on this particular topic, because I do get a lot of questions about it, and I totally understand that. But I also want to say, and also, of course, it's good to add maybe a Fusible in the shoulder seam as well, or you can use other type of method. But don't be tempted to fuse on soft jersey and stuff like that, Malena. I mean, if you're making a top and you feel like I can't really see the purpose of using.
No, I think it's going to change the drapiness, the feeling of the fabric way too much compared to the actual fabric, and it's just going to look a little bit rigid then compared to the original one. I mean, it really depends on the purpose and where it is. In general, also with the knitted, bigger pieces are maybe not so good with fusing. I mean, color is one thing. On the Ivy cardigan, for example, I mean, then it is supposed to be a little bit more structured look, and you also have a little bit more, not stiffer, but more stable quality. So then it's, I mean, more suitable to have fusing on. But yeah, on drapier fabric, then it's not so suitable. I mean, that quality you just showed, I mean, that looked really drapey, so I think it would go really well. But yeah, it really depends on what kind of style you are using it. Maybe if you want to have just small patches because of some seams needs to be I mean, it's a risk that the fabric is going to be torn because of the seams or something. Then it might be good to use it just as reinforcement. But yeah, I think it's more on smaller pieces, on more structured type of garments that you need it. And also, some qualities might not do fusing so well. I mean, Punto di Roma, for example, that has a really flat surface. But if you have, for example, a college fabric with loops on the back, then it's not. I mean, the glue on the fusing is not gonna stay really on that fabric, and it's gonna come off after you wash it a few times. So it really depends a little bit on the fabric as well, if it's going to be a nice mix, basically.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And if you have those instances, for instance, as you say, Malena, that the glue won't stick, it's much better to use some type of fabric stabilizer instead. You don't really have to usually. And also those, I guess, again, also it's not always suitable to use on loosely knitted garment, loosely knitted sweater knits and stuff like that. Again, you will probably end. It won't going to be somewhat of a challenge. And of course, if the knit is open knit, again, it won't probably a great idea to get the Fusible because with the glue, because then of course it will be see through and it won't even stick on some places. So my general recommendation, as you say, Malena, just when it's more garments that are more structured with a stable surface, definitely explore this option. Also, it's great to I use it also when I do slanted pocket openings on joggers and things like that. I also use Fusible because that really helps the pocket from not gaping and growing out. You don't have to do it. You can also use a strip of fabric or whatever. But I'm actually use quite a lot of of Fusible. And another instance where you should not use a stretch Fusible with glue is if, for instance, if you are doing, say, a waistband on a pair of leggings, for instance, you might be tempted to like add some stability by using a Fusible, but since those fabrics has negative ease and are supposed to stretch out a lot, the chance or the risk of the glue to not sticking when you pull the garment on, if you have a tight fitting garment, is very, very high, and you're going to get some really ugly cracks and ridges and everything like that on the outside of the fabric when the glue doesn't stay, and it's going to look really, really awful, to be honest. So again, as we always say, do a sample. So if you want to experiment with before you start using it on the garment, it's a very, very good idea to just use a fabric scrap and fuse it the same way as you have intended it, using the same type of Fusible.
And I think it's maybe like you can have as a guideline or a rule that if the garment has a lot of negative ease, that is really tight, then you should not use a fusible stabilizer, because when the fabric is stretched and it stretches out more compared to the fusing, it is gonna, the glue is gonna crack, and it's not gonna be, it's one thing if you have it like just a small patch on the shoulders to stabilize the shoulders, and then you actually also sew a seam, you like basically sew it together with the garment, then that's one thing, but to have on bigger areas on a negative eased garment, no, it's not. It's not a good match.
No. But if you want to have stabilizing for that, I do have a solution as well, because one of my favorite material, which is something that you can usually get on Amazon and definitely also in shops that sells fabrics and notions for making underwear. And what I'm holding up now is a stable stretch mesh. It's usually referred to as power net, and it's used to, for instance, making bras, maybe the back of the bra, or maybe lining the bra, because it has some nice crosswise stretch, but it also has some stability. So it's not soft mesh, not the kind of delicate see-through mesh. It's much more stable. And if you have an area of a garment with negative ease that you need to stabilize, for instance, a bra or the waistband of perhaps a pair of leggings or similar with negative ease, you can actually just use this as interfacing or interlining, I guess it's called, maybe interlining, when you just add if you sandwich this between the upper and the under layer of something, or just underneath the if you have a single layer, then you will get some nice stability and you get some stretch. I'm holding it up now and I'm stretching, as you can see it is stable but still has some stretch, so that's a really good option to explore if you run into what Malena says, if you need to stabilize something with negatives. And you can also use these power strips of the power stretch as well to stabilize the shoulder seam. It's one of many options. So it's good to have this in the stash, and you don't need, again, to have matching colors because it's going to be on the inside. Maybe you can use a skin color, or black is a good starting point. I'm holding up a burgundy now, but honestly, for the most part, I just use black power mesh for everything.
I never actually used power mesh, but it sounds great. It feels a little bit like, active wear and bra making and everything. That's like a really material sport.
Yeah,
like
right.
Everything
it's very
comes down to the
high-tech.
material. You have to have the right material, otherwise it's just not going to work.
Yeah, it must be such a fascinating process to develop underwear and stuff like that, because, as you say, it's all about the material, because that's what we're going to do, shaping, and it's because a lot of the modern underwear techniques and also activewear, they're not even accessible to us sewers because they use such different type of techniques and textiles and everything like that. So it's kind of hard to replicate. I think a lot of bras today are, shaped with heat, like form pressed, or I don't know the English word for it. I think it's called form pressed in. So, and that's kind of hard to replicate. It's like a seamless thing, but it's just shaped with some type of tool or something like that. I don't know. Do we have any insight as someone who works in the business, Malena, or have you ever been
I've done a little bit of not a lot of underwear, definitely no, but a little bit of swimwear or inspired garments. And yeah, I mean, they are basically form pressed with heat, like shaped molds. Like, no, you can't replicate that. I mean, just for easy, when you have a padded bra, for example, or like sports bra, and you have these like loose pads that you have on the inside. I mean, those are 3D. They have a 3D shape. And that's something that is pressed like in a mold with heat fixated, so it always has the same shape. So yeah, I mean, that's, you can't really do that at home, unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely. So you have to do maybe for different kind of, but the fun thing about doing your own underwear, for instance, is you can use a lot of fascinating, interesting materials and lots of color blocking and things like that. So I think today a lot of underwear in stores are extremely bland because they're not very like expressive. They are, some type of skin color. And then maybe black and white, and if you're lucky, you might find another color. They are, they're very functional, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's I've seen I follow a few on Instagram that makes underwear. And it's really common that they sell it as a set with the sewing instruction, and they have picked out all the materials, so you buy a complete set basically. And I mean, that is so smart to do, because if you make a pattern for it and sewing instructions, I mean, you based it on a certain material, and then to provide that material to the customer as well. I mean, that's a more guaranteed to success than compared to the customer is gonna choose and pick whatever kind of material fabric available and maybe is not at all suitable. So I think it's like a little bit of bulletproofing your your concept.
Yeah, you're very, very true. That makes a lot of sense with those kits for sure. And I mean, it's always tricky with fabrics. They can, feel nice when you look at it in a store, and then it gets literally no shaping, which is definitely a stability, which is something you definitely want when you're making your own underwear. So Malena, you have another question, right?
Yeah, I got one. Any tips for figuring out seam allowances shape for odd angles and points for self-drafting?
Malena, I think that's your topic.
Yeah, I mean, if it is for self-drafting, it's just you who are going to use the pattern, then you have a little bit of choice to do whatever you feel is working for you. I mean, angles that are 90 degrees, I mean, then the seam allowance angle is going to be at 90 degrees as well, so that's nothing weird about that. But then as he wrote about different angles, for example, if you have a princess seam or something, that then one of the corner is going to be really pointy, and the other one is going to be very not pointy.
Yeah.
And if you are sewing for yourself, I mean, you can just draw your seam allowance 1 centimeter or whatever seam allowance you want to do, and just see where the corner meets and use that. You don't have to do anything particular to the corner if you don't want to. You just though need to keep in mind that where is the actual seam going to be? Like, where, not the seam allowance corner, where is the seam corner? And I usually, when I self-drafted pattern in school and liked it with paper and pen, the original way, when I sewed, then I took my needle, like when I pinned the garment before sewing it, I always took a needle and put it in the exact corner where the seam is gonna start, and I put it also in the other fabric, so the needle points at exactly that corner. Then the seam allowance, the corners are gonna be not aligning, but I mean that doesn't matter, because it's the seam where you actually are gonna sew, it's those corners that needs to be aligned. So for me, since I know this, I made the pattern myself, I know where the seam is going to be, I don't care about the corner then, because I can sew it anyway. I know that the seam corner are not going to be aligned, they are going to be pointing different
directions. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
One is probably going to point up and the other one is going to point a little bit down. Right?
Exactly, they are going to be a little bit shifted, and That's no problem. I mean, it's not going to be visible really. It's in the seam allowance. You probably will trim it away if you're using an overlock or something. So, I mean, you could go that, choose if you want to do it like that, or if you want them to be aligned so it's a little bit easier to sew. And I think this is a little bit more general if you are making patterns for like a commercial purposes, like you are selling them, you want it to be really easy for the customer who is going to sew it. Then you can place the patterns on top of each other, like how you are going to sew them basically. And again, make sure that the sewing corners align, and then again you can see that I mean the corner are going to be a little bit shifted, but then you can just draw basically like a middle, how do you say, a middle point in between them, so it's basically like 90 degrees from the seam allowance edge. Just so one is going to be, you're going to add a little bit length on one seam allowance corner, and then you're going to remove a little bit from the other one. So they align. So then when you are going to sew, you can actually align the seam allowance corners, basically.
Yeah,
so it's going to look a little bit,
aligned,
they are going to look a little bit funny, a little bit different, the seam allowance corners then. But then it's easier for the sewist to actually just make sure they align, and you can sew it. So you can do, it's 2 different ways that you can do. The end result is going to be, I mean, the same. It's most important is that the sewing corners are aligning. And again, if you are self-drafting, I mean, you can choose whatever you are gonna do. If you would sell it to customers, then I think the second one is recommended, because then it's a little bit more easier for if you are a new sewist to know exactly how you are gonna align the corners to make sure that the seams are not shifted or anything. But again, if it's just for yourself, do as you please.
Yeah, that's a very good tip. Yeah, I agree. And I think if you have any illustration of this, Malena, maybe we could also post it on our Stitching Talespod, so our listeners and viewers can see the difference here, as you say. And for instance, it is an issue usually with the princess seam. I mean, most seam allowances is very straightforward, but as you say, when there is that kind of like directional difference, that's usually where the seam allowance becomes a little bit of a struggle. And I have actually started to do more, when I'm doing my own patterns, I've started to do the second method as well as you described. And, you know, that I like to mirror the pieces to make sure that when you fold it apart, it's going to be like a line, because it does make sewing easier. Even though, as you say, you just need to know where the stitching line starts. It's still, you know, you're still kind of in your head when you're sewing. You have a tendency of putting a lot of focus on the seam allowance rather than, because that's usually 9 out of 10 times the seam allowance is a good guide, but not with those more trickier slanted seams, or for instance like that. It's the same, I think, when you're doing how should I say, something that is folded back, for instance, or a similar thing. You usually also need to figure out the seam allowance. So, for instance, if I don't know but that's probably a bad example, but you have to correct me. For instance, if you have a fold back piece, it can be maybe some type of facing or something like that on a pocket. Again, you need to check that you can't, because the seam allowance, you want, when you fold it back, you want both to align, for instance, with the side seam. So again, you might need to check that, so you don't, sometimes if you just add seam allowance and don't check and fold back, when you start, you might end up with a little bit of a gap, perhaps, between the side seam and the folded back piece. If I don't know if I make a good explanation here, but I think it's very good to just check that and leave a little bit extra paper, for instance, if you are a little bit unsure. So, and after you drafted the pattern, you fold it back, you check, and then you trim, so that you know that everything is going to be the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same like principle. If you have a really wide hem, for example, on a sleeve, and that is usually quite, the side seam are usually quite angled. So if you have a wide sleeve hem, then you want those like side angles to mirror the hem as well. So when you fold it up, it's not going to be lacking. So yeah, it's good to have I mean, you always need to actually I mean, make sure that those kind of things aligns up when you need to think how they are going to be sewn, how they are going to be, as you say, folded and everything, that it needs to match basically what it's going to be folded, mirrored against.
Exactly, and that's very easy to do. You can measure, but you can also just cut and trim if you're working with pen and paper. I think both methods are very nice, and as you say, Malena, you bring up the great point as well. It's the same, if you're having a pair of like pants that are flared, for instance. If you just keep extending the seam allowance even more, when it's going to be folded, you're going to have some excess fabric, especially if the seam allowance is quite wide, maybe 4 centimeters, for instance. It's going to be, it won't lie completely. You can, of course, ease it in, but it's much more easier if you, as you say, Malena, if you also adjust the angle of the hem so it doesn't like add too much fabric on the inside.
Yeah, and I mean, the more flared garment you have, I mean, a circle skirt, for example, the less wide fold up is going to be a lot more easier too. So if you are going to have a 5 centimeter 2-inch fold up hem on a circular skirt, I mean, that's going to be a nightmare too, because when you are folding, the outer edge on the hem is going to be longer compared to where you are trying to sew it onto. I mean, it's not going to match, so you are going to have the small folds on the inside then to force it into place. So it's the smaller the hem, then the better, I would say.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. Like a very, very narrow hem, very, very narrow hem. I mean, no more than 1 centimeter wide, a max, I would say. And if you go to ready-wear, you will see that it's usually these are rolled hem, for instance. So it's like tiny, 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 just a couple of millimeters wide, just to, as Malena says, to solve that problem. And it will also, I think it will also remove some of the drape and the softness if the hem is too wide as well, because you want it to drape nicely on a circle skirt because the cut on the bias, so you want that nice drape, and that will kind of be hindered if you use a too wide of a hem as well. So yeah, very good idea. It's a good rule of thumb, generally speaking, right? If it's a straight garment, wider hem. But if you're sewing a pencil shirt, for instance, you can definitely go wide, right?
Yeah.
And then if the wider the skirt, the more narrow the hem.
Yeah, I think that's a good guideline. I just came to think about when I mean, this is 15 years ago when and it was on my department. It was my colleague, patternmaker. She had a little bit of a, how do you say, mental puzzle to figure out. The designer wanted to have a very wide skirt, not like a full circular skirt, but like maybe half full for circular skirt, so very much rounded basically. And then in a woven fabric, and she also wanted to have pleats along the skirt, so when you wore it, I mean, the pleat should look straight. And she was just like,
oh,
how is that gonna work? Like, when you fold, you can't fold a rounded pleat, like that's not, wait a minute, no. At the end of the day, I don't think that one worked out. Because I mean, it is impossible to fold a rounded shape. I mean, try to do that on paper. On fabric, you might get will steam force and but yeah, no.
And very, very time consuming to get those pleats. Even if you were able to do it with a lot of manipulation on each garment, I mean, it makes no financial sense to have to fix that on every, if you're going to mass produce something. Yeah. And it goes to show, sometimes I think it's helpful for a designer to have some like rudimentary sewing skills, like a basic understanding of how things are assembled, because that can at least, I guess, hopefully it doesn't hinder the design process, but it can definitely like make more like manageable, or actually designs that can go into production. because some as you say, some things they won't work in they might look nice on a drawing, but in practice it's almost impossible to actually pull off.
Yeah, and I mean here you really need to be creative, and like you can make them cut and sewn instead and have the illusion of them have to be folded, but like yeah, I mean designers, they need to have like basic understanding of course of both of pattern making and sewing to be able to design what's possible to actually make. So yeah. Definitely they need to have that a little bit of that skill, or at least understanding. Or they just need to listen to the pattern makers.
Yeah, exactly, because you know your stuff, right?
True.
Yeah. Anyways, it was so fun to do this Q&A episode again. If you want to drop us a question, do it over at our Instagram account, stitchingtalespod, or on our YouTube channel, stitchingtalespod, and or at stitchingtalespod@gmail.com, so we can do more Q&A episodes in the future. And also a big thank you to all of you that submitted questions. It was really fun to answer them, and I think hopefully you will be able to clear some confusion at least, hopefully. And I really enjoyed this episode, so thank you so much for listening. I am Johanna Lundström.
And I am Malena Hjerpe. Bye bye.
Bye bye.